A modern man begins his life believing power comes from taking, from chasing, from consuming everything that excites his senses, because the world teaches him that desire is dominance and indulgence is proof of masculinity. Yet over time he notices that the more he takes, the less he holds, and the more he consumes, the emptier he feels, until exhaustion replaces excitement and confusion replaces confidence. He lives inside stimulation, scrolling, touching, imagining, reacting, believing. Movement means progress, but every reaction pulls him further from himself, and the harder he chases pleasure, the weaker his grip on direction becomes, until discipline feels foreign and silence feels threatening, because silence forces him to confront what distraction was hiding. Lust becomes his escape from effort and fantasy, replaces ambition, not because he lacks strength, but because strength without structure collapses inward, and every indulgence strains the mind to seek release instead of mastery, until patience erodes and focus fractures, and the man begins mistaking impulse for instinct. The greatest trick played on modern men was convincing them that control is repression and restraint is weakness, when in reality, restraint is structure, and structure is what allows power to be expressed without self-destruction, because energy without containment does not liberate. It burns everything around it, including the man himself. Semen retention enters his life, not as belief, but as interruption, because for the first time, impulse is denied obedience, and in that denial space appears, and in that space, awareness grows, and the man begins to see how often he surrendered his attention without being asked, and how frequently he gave away the very force meant to build his future. As retention continues, the noise quiets not instantly but steadily, and the mind begins to settle into itself, and thoughts gain weight and direction, and the constant hunger dissolves into grounded presence. Because energy that was once leaking is now circulating internally, strengthening the nervous system, sharpening perception, and stabilizing emotion. He realizes attraction was never about others, but about fragmentation within himself, because every person that pulled his attention was reflecting something he had neglected to build, and as those internal gaps begin closing, the external pull weakens and desire shifts from control to information, guiding self-improvement instead of commanding obedience. The body responds predictably to conservation, because biology rewards preservation and direction, and as energy accumulates, posture changes, voice steadies, and movement slows. Not from hesitation, but from certainty, and people feel this shift before it is explained, because coherence communicates louder than credentials ever could. Work deepens because focus no longer fractures, and effort feels lighter because energy is available, and consistency replaces bursts of motivation, and the man begins finishing what he starts, not because he forces himself, but because resistance no longer dominates his internal dialogue. He understands now that discipline was never punishment but alignment, because when actions match intention, energy stops fighting itself, and life simplifies as temptation loses negotiation power, and clarity replaces anxiety, and anxiety no longer drives escape, because the nervous system has learned safety through structure. The world begins responding differently, not magically, but mechanically, because systems reward consistency, and people trust presence, and opportunities flow toward those who are internally ordered. And the man no longer wonders who he is becoming, because his daily actions already answered with precision. Looking back, he sees that the version of himself who chased pleasure was not weak but uninformed, powerful without containment, like fire without a vessel, destroying itself through excess and waste. And retention became the container, discipline became the form, and purpose became the direction that finally allowed his strength to build rather than burn. The final understanding arrives slowly, then all at once, that masculine energy is not meant to be chased outward, but built inward and projected naturally. And when seed is preserved, thought sharpens, and when thought sharpens, action becomes precise, and when action becomes precise, destiny begins responding in kind. With this shift, the man noticed his time stretching, because distraction no longer compresses his days and hours, regain weight, meaning, and consequence. And where he once felt rushed, he now feels deliberate, because urgency was never lack of time but lack of control over attention. Retention begins revealing patterns, not only in himself but in society, and he sees clearly how modern systems profit from weakened men drained of force, chasing relief instead of building legacy, and this awareness does not create anger but clarity, because understanding dissolves resentment and replaces it with responsibility. He understands now why the culture glorifies excess, because excess creates dependence, and dependence creates control, and a man who cannot regulate desire cannot regulate destiny, and this truth sharpens his resolve not to escape the world but to move through it, awake and sovereign as days turn into weeks. His body recalibrates, sleep deepens, recovery improves, and strength compounds, because biological energy once wasted is redirected into repair and growth. In this, physical stability anchors mental discipline, creating a feedback loop where effort produces reward instead of burnout. Confidence returns not as arrogance, but as quiet certainty, because he no longer seeks validation externally, and the need to be seen fades as self-respect grows, and when a man stops begging for recognition, the world begins offering it unsolicited. He notices conversations changing because he listens more than he speaks, and words carry intention rather than impulse, and people feel heard rather than impressed, and trust forms quickly because presence is rare. And those who carry it become gravitational without trying. Temptation still appears, but it no longer controls, because discipline has trained the nervous system to delay reaction, and in that delay choice exists, and choice is the birthplace of power, because reaction is slavery, and selection is freedom. The man realizes masculinity was never about dominance over others, but mastery of self. Because a man who governs his inner world naturally commands respect in the outer one, and those who lack this mastery constantly seek external authority to replace internal order. Retention sharpens ambition, not through fantasy, but through realism. Because goals become grounded, and effort becomes sustainable, and instead of chasing overnight success, he builds daily systems. Knowing momentum compounds faster than intensity ever could. He begins waking early, not out of punishment, but alignment, because mornings are quiet and clarity is strongest when the world is asleep, and in this stillness he plans with precision and moves with intention, setting the tone before distraction can intervene. Work becomes sacred not because it is glamorous, but because it is focused, and he understands that meaning is created through commitment, not excitement. And by staying consistent, he outpaces men who rely on motivation alone. The body becomes an ally instead of a battlefield. Because urges no longer dictate behavior, and hunger no longer clouds judgment, and energy flows upward, fueling creativity, strategy, and resilience. Instead of leaking downward through compulsive release, he understands now why ancient traditions guarded seed fiercely, not as superstition, but as biological wisdom. Because life force is finite, and those who preserved it built civilizations, while those who wasted it chased pleasure and left nothing behind, the man stops negotiating with weakness because he recognizes that every compromise trains the mind toward collapse, and every refusal strengthens identity, and identity, once solid, becomes unshakable regardless of environment. He notices fear dissolving, not because danger disappears, but because courage is built through repetition of restraint, and restraint teaches the mind that discomfort is survivable, and survival builds confidence, stronger than any affirmation ever could. Purpose sharpens, because clarity expands, and when purpose is clear, sacrifice feels logical rather than painful, and the man willingly gives up short-term pleasure for long-term dominance because he now understands the exchange rate of energy. He sees how attraction shifts because women respond to grounded presence, not performance, and desire flows toward certainty rather than need, and this confirms what retention revealed: attraction is a byproduct, not a pursuit. Power now expresses through calm decisions, measured speech, and unwavering standards, and the man realizes the ultimate flex is not indulgence, but control, because control multiplies options, while excess destroys them. The realization settles deeply that this path was always available but never advertised. Because freedom threatens systems built on dependency, and once seen it cannot be unseen, and once chosen it cannot be undone. As discipline deepens, the man recognizes that boredom was never emptiness, but unused power, and what once felt dull now feels spacious. Because silence is no longer an enemy but a resource, and within that space strategy forms. Patience strengthens, and vision expands beyond immediate gratification. He stops explaining himself to people who do not understand the path, because explanation leaks energy, and conviction does not require consensus, and this quiet confidence separates him from noise, allowing him to move without friction or unnecessary resistance. The nervous system recalibrates to stability, and emotional spikes smooth out, because retention teaches the body that it does not need constant release to feel safe, and safety allows the brain to operate from logic rather than survival, producing better decisions across work, health, and relationships. He notices how consistency begins reshaping identity, because the man he is becoming is reinforced daily through action, not affirmation, and this self-trust compounds faster than external praise ever could, anchoring him through uncertainty and pressure. The illusion of overnight success dissolves and is replaced by respect for compounding effort, because retained energy fuels persistence, and persistence bends probability in his favor, and the man realizes luck favors those who remain operational when others burn out. He begins setting boundaries effortlessly, not from aggression but clarity, because when a man knows his direction, every distraction becomes obvious, and refusal feels natural rather than confrontational, preserving energy for what truly matters. Social dynamics shift because people sense alignment, and alignment creates authority, and authority attracts opportunity without manipulation, and the man understands leadership is not claimed, but granted through coherence of action. He reflects on how often modern men are taught to express everything except discipline and how emotional indulgence is celebrated. While self-regulation is mocked, yet he sees clearly that mastery requires emotional strength, not emotional release. Retention sharpens memory, focus, and foresight because energy fuels cognition, and cognition fuels strategy, and strategy separates laborers from leaders, and this cognitive edge becomes visible in how he plans months ahead while others react daily. The man understands now that sacrifice is misunderstood because he did not lose pleasure, he exchanged it for leverage, and leverage multiplies future freedom, making present restraint a rational investment rather than deprivation. He moves slower, but accomplishes more, because haste was never efficiency, and by acting deliberately, he reduces mistakes, waste, and recovery time, increasing output without increasing effort. The body becomes disciplined through routine movement, nourishment, and rest, because retention amplifies. Feedback and poor habits are felt immediately, while good habits reward quickly, creating a closed loop of optimization. He notices how anxiety fades because uncertainty no longer dominates, and even when outcomes are unclear, his internal state remains stable because stability comes from self-governance, not external guarantees. The need to impress evaporates because impressing others was compensation for self-doubt, and as self-respect solidifies external approval, loses negotiating power, freeing attention for creation. The man realizes how attraction previously drained him because he chased validation instead of direction, and now attraction simply orbits his trajectory without altering it, confirming that desire follows strength rather than creates it. He sees the difference between confidence and arrogance clearly now because arrogance demands recognition, while confidence remains unaffected by response, and this distinction protects him from ego traps that derail progress. Retention teaches him patience, not as waiting, but as preparation, because while others rush outcomes, he builds capacity, and when opportunity appears, he is structurally ready to execute. He understands now why the strongest men throughout history valued discipline over indulgence, because they were playing long games, measured in decades, not moments, and legacy requires endurance, not impulse. The realization settles permanently that energy is destiny, because how a man uses his force determines his future, and retention is not denial, but direction, aligning biology with ambition. The man now views modern temptation with detached clarity because he understands it is engineered, not accidental, and once awareness replaces impulse, manipulation loses power and freedom begins where unconscious behavior ends. He stops measuring progress by emotion and starts to measuring it by alignment, because feelings fluctuate but standards endure, and this shift stabilizes momentum. Even on days motivation disappears, retention transforms discomfort into signal rather than threat, because ergs become information about unused energy, and instead of escaping them, he channels them into work, training, and creative output. Converting pressure into progress, he notices his presence commanding space without effort, because grounded men occupy rooms differently, and this presence is not intimidation but calm authority born from internal order. The world tests him repeatedly because growth attracts friction, and each test strengthens identity. Because discipline practiced under pressure becomes character, and character determines outcomes more reliably than talent ever could. He no longer consumes content endlessly, because he prefers creation, and consumption feels passive while creation feels sovereign and retained. Energy demands expression through building, not scrolling. Time management improves naturally because attention is no longer fragmented, and with focus restored, hours stretch and priorities sharpen, making productivity a byproduct, not a struggle. He understands why most never reach their potential, because they leak energy before it compounds and then blame circumstance rather than behavior, and this insight fuels compassion without imitation. The man stops outsourcing meaning to pleasure and builds it through responsibility, because responsibility anchors identity, and identity stabilizes action, and stability unlocks sustained success. He becomes comfortable being misunderstood because clarity often looks strange in a distracted world, and progress rarely needs applause, only consistency. Retention strengthens intuition because the mind is no longer clouded and decisions feel clear rather than forced, and clarity eliminates hesitation, accelerating execution. He recognizes the spiritual dimension of discipline, not as mysticism but alignment, because when body, mind, and action synchronize, life flows with less resistance. The man sees clearly that freedom is not doing whatever he wants, but wanting what serves his future, and this redefinition eliminates internal conflict. He notices how stress reduces because he lives within his values, and values simplify choices, and simplicity reduces cognitive load, preserving energy. The past loses its grip because regret fades when direction is clear, and momentum dissolves guilt through forward motion. He understands attraction now as reflection because people respond to internal order and chaos repels without explanation, confirming the mirror he once ignored. Retention teaches him that masculinity is built, not inherited. And every day is a vote for the man he becomes, and votes compound into destiny. He no longer seeks shortcuts because shortcuts bypass growth, and growth is the real asset. Retention protects and accelerates. If this video gave you real value, tap the thanks button. Your support helps me keep creating deeper content like this. Every thanks is a spark that keeps this mission alive. Your support means more than you know. Was this the fire you needed? Let me know by hitting like. More importantly, if you want this growth to be consistent, subscribe and join the team. I love connecting with every one of you. The Telegram channel is open. The link is in the description. Your one mission: share this powerful message with one person who needs to hear it. Have an absolutely powerful day. The man realizes this discipline was the opportunity placed before him quietly, and watching this message is part of that invitation, because awareness precedes transformation. This is the real chance given, not by chance, but by timing, because those ready to hear it will act, and those who act will separate themselves permanently. The seed he preserves is not just biological, but symbolic, because it represents intention, restraint, and future creation, and through it, he steps into authorship of his life. This is where the path narrows and power concentrates, and the man who walks it does not chase greatness, he becomes unavoidable.